I want to thank you for being here, and it's cool. It's cool. It's cool that you guys choose to take time away from your lives and spend some time with us on Sunday afternoon. One of the things that I was talking about with a friend of mine, she pastors a church that has been in the city for a long time. It's a West Indian church, very hype church. If you go there, they're like, wow, the whole time. It's really cool. And but she said that something that they've been walking through, something that we know here at Pivot 613 is that there are some people who choose to attend our service through the camera, and that's okay. Obviously, we like to have people here, but it's not just because we want to have seats filled. It's because there is something really cool that happens when you're physically together in a room with other believers. And there is something that, and this is the reason why God, for example, did not make us as sort of single cell replicating organisms, but He made us as, oh, my finger got stuck there. He made us as family. And He placed us inside families, and there's a reason that we exist in community. There's a kind of nurturing and a kind of growth that only happens when we're together, as opposed to when we're kind of doing this thing on our own. So I'm glad that you choose to come out. I'm glad that you choose to come out. Something special happens when we're together. So to recap this series, Rebuilding Faith, we're in week number 3. And in the first week, we asked the question, who is your master? Now, if you are rebuilding faith, or if you want to rebuild your faith, or if you want to build a faith in the first instance, and someone says, well, the first question you need to ask yourself is, who is your master? You would say that's an unusual question, wouldn't you? But it is an important question if you want to rebuild your faith. If you want to rebuild a robust faith, it is important that you ask yourself the question, who is your master? Because whoever has mastery of you over your life, or whatever has mastery over your life, has ramifications for the choices you make for your life. And the second week, we asked another unusual question. We asked the question, who is your great love? And this is an important question because whoever is your great love holds your heart. You see, Christ following all too often has been reduced to a system of mind control or a set of rules. Even this whole attending church on a weekly basis, it can either be a rule in your life or it can be something else. We ask at Pivot 613, we ask you to consider something else. We ask you to consider relationship. When we gather together, it is not because there is a rule about it. We gather together because of relationship with one another, and also relationship with God. This is a relationship that flows from love. That is why this question is important. Who is your great love? If love is not at the center of our walk with God, then we completely miss the point, and we end up rebranding religion. And religion is tiresome. It is tedious. It is very exhausting. Because no one will ever live up to the ideals of religion. But if we think of what we're doing in terms of relationship, it changes the equation. So now, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to turn a corner. And we're going to walk over some in possibly dicey ground. Because the reason why people step away from their faith, sometimes, it's multifaceted. There's the question of mastery, there's the question of love versus religion, but then there's also other questions. And today, we're going to read from a passage of scripture, but before we get to it, I just want to ask you to hear what I have to say. Oh my gosh. I just want to ask you to hear what I have to say. Just walk with me through this. There are aspects of being a Christ follower that are fun and that are whatever and easygoing and whatever. And there's times when being a Christ follower, as a Christ follower, there's more that is demanded of us. Because we must never forget that following Christ is a countercultural proposition. In fact, This is an important thing that is always left out when we're asking people to join our Christian groups. You know, when we're making the pitch for Christianity to someone that's not a Christian, sometimes we forget to mention to them that, hey, like this thing is awesome, but it's going to make you swim upstream in some cases. In fact, Jesus himself knew this. Jesus knew that the things that he was talking about when he was trying to set up this whole Christianity, he actually didn't call it Christianity. It was a derogatory term that people made up for his followers. When Jesus was setting up his movement, he knew that the things that he was saying were going to be subversive to the established order. And if he continued talking about them, there'd be consequences. There would. I mean, he used to say things like, the last shall be first. Now, if you are the first, if you are the most important person around, and some guy starts to build up a movement that says, the last shall be first, the last shall be first, you start to hear signs and hear sounds of revolution. Those are the kind of words that people who are starting revolutions start to say. The last shall be first. We are the many, not the few. You guys are the few. He said things like, if you want to be great, you have to be a servant. It does not sound like a dangerous thing until you're in a society where there are masters and servants. Then when he starts to do a movement about service, you know, the servants are the ones who are great. If you want to be great, you have to be a servant. It starts to be scary for the masters, doesn't it? Jesus dissed the religious leaders of his time. Him and his cousin, his cousin was John the Baptist. They called them whitewashed tombs. There's no leader, there's no politician, there's no CEO that would love to hear you call him or her a whitewashed tomb. Saying these things had consequences, and Jesus knew it. And Jesus went into the temple and trashed it. And the temple had become this place where the priests had set up a kind of corrupt system for people to buy specially bred doves and specially bred sheep, and they would not accept sacrifices that had not been bought from the market that was in the temple. And so they were so they were making a profit off of something that God had said do not make a profit off of. And Jesus, his message escalated. He went into the temple and was like, you know, the Lord's temple shall be a temple of prayer, not a den of thieves. And he grabbed a whip and whipped people out and trashed all the stalls. It's like, when you do that, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to come for you. They are. Jesus would tell the people that they were being duped by the religious leaders. He had a conversation with a Samaritan woman by a well in the middle of the day, and she was like, well, they're telling us to worship here, but we Samaritans think we should worship there. And Jesus was like, no, if you do that, you're missing the point. The time is coming when where you worship God will not matter. It is how you worship, the state of your heart, what's happening inside. That is the thing that matters. Jesus saying these things in a circumstance that was highly theocratic, that was highly based around this kind of religious order, was very, very subversive. And it will get you killed. And it did. Jesus was no dummy. He knew that this talk would cost him something. Now, here's the thing. Most people, when they say subversive things, or when they enter into subversive movements, and then it comes the time to pay the cost of their words, they pull back. They run away. They go, oh, no, I wasn't really saying that. But Jesus was willing to pay the price, and I think that that's what makes him awesome. He knew that going against the flow of culture and bucking societal trends would not be easy. There would be times when there was a real reckoning. Let's read about it, Matthew 16. Matthew 16, verse 22. Then Jesus made it clear to his disciples that it was now necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, submit to an ordeal of suffering at the hands of the religious leaders, be killed, and then on the third day be raised alive. Peter took him in hand, protesting, "Impossible, Master, that can never be." Let's pause there for a second. Peter's reaction is all of us. Suffering is going to come? Impossible. That can never be. Peter had not fully grasped the implications of Jesus' teaching. In Peter's construct, this whole following God thing did not involve suffering and death. What are you talking about, Jesus? Suffering and death. And it is true for many of us that when we think of faith matters, if we're truly honest, suffering, opposition, oppression, calamity, these are not part of our faith equation. And so when it happens, we react like Peter did. Impossible. This can never be. It crumbles our faith. It breaks it from the inside. And so one of the ways to rebuild faith is to be honest about the fact that we did not think it was going to be that hard. Sometimes the impression that we who lead the church give when we're speaking to the people that we're leading is that things are always going to be onwards and upwards and overcoming and this thing and that thing. And sometimes following Jesus is hard. Sometimes following Jesus means that you're going to be socially branded. You guys know that that one of the things I do during the week is I drive Uber. And it's so funny. People get in the car, we talk. Eventually they will ask me what I do. And one of the things I say is I lead a small church. And immediately they change the subject. They don't want to go there. Sometimes they stop talking. Sometimes following Jesus is not a socially popular thing. We know it. We live here in this city. We know how it is. Sometimes following Jesus requires that you sacrifice some things, and maybe we did not realize that we had to sacrifice. Maybe we did not realize how much we had to sacrifice to swim upstream to get something that is so much better for us than what we had before. Maybe we did not realize how much we would be challenged or silenced. We have to be honest about the fact, sometimes when we're rebuilding faith, that we didn't think it was going to be so hard. Verse 23, but Jesus didn't swerve. Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. Verse 24, then Jesus went to work on his disciples, and he said this, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me, and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for? My friend Grace, who sang the first song with me, and she's going to sing the last song this evening with me, is here from Edmonton. And her parents and I and Evelyn are really close. And we've known Grace since she was very young, and we've been asking them for a long time to let her come and stay with us for a while. And they were like, okay, we can loan her to you for a week. We're like, could we have her for longer? And so we waited until she was old enough to travel on her own, and she finally came. And Grace has a dream to be a dancer. Now, she started late compared to most dancers, but she's working really hard at it. Do you mind if she shows us what she's been working on? Come here. I'll make some room for you. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for letting me embarrass you like that. So, there's a reason I wanted you to see this. Even the simplest dance moves require practice. The more complex the dance move, the more you have to practice. If you want to become a good dancer, a great dancer, if you want to make it your life, you're going to have to practice and practice and practice. And if Grace wants to fulfill the dream for her life, she's going to have to practice a lot. She's going to have to spend a lot of time doing this. The point of all of this is that everything that is worth something has a high cost. Everything that is worth something has a high cost. I have people that come to me and say, hey, I'd like to learn piano. I tell them, okay, before I teach you even one piano lesson, I want you to promise me that you will set aside an hour every day to practice. And they go, ooh, I don't think I can do that. I'm like, I don't think I can be your teacher. Anything that is worth something has a high cost. People think that there is a shortcut between not knowing how to play piano and playing like me. I've never played here, so some of you don't know that I can play, but I spent a lot of time and a lot of years and a lot of money trying to get to be as good as I am. Those of you who are highly educated, you know this. There is a cost to good education. If you are an artist of any kind, you know that there is a cost to creating good art. If you're a scientist of any kind, you know that there is a cost to making scientific breakthrough. There is a cost, even to something that seems as simple like celebrity. There is a cost to celebrity. Anything that is worth something has a high cost. Now, if anything that is worth something that has a high cost in our human context, what about something that is so much better than anything we could create on our own? What about this whole following Christ thing? I think that following Christ and walking to the end of what he has for us is so much awesome than anything we could do for ourselves. Following Christ has a high cost. A life free of fear has a high cost, because in order to walk away from fear and to embrace love, it will cost you something. In order to walk away from the things that people have said you should fear and the situations that they've said you should fear and the people that they've said you should fear, it will require a cost if you think about it. A life that is delivered from the curse of sin has a cost. Someone has to pay the curse of sin. A countercultural life of mercy and grace has a cost. And if you want to rebuild faith, you have to understand this at a deep level. Don't run away from the cost. Don't run away from suffering. That's what Jesus is saying. Embrace it. Don't run away from trials. Don't run away from trials. Face them. We do not face the trials in our own strength. That's the best thing about following Christ. We face them in his power. And even though they feel like they might break us or they might, just wash us under, understand that even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, just like David says in Psalm 23, God is there with you. Now, I've volunteered or worked in churches since 97. It's more than 20 years now. And every year that I've volunteered or worked in churches, I will see or even have a conversation with a young man or a young woman who makes a choice to walk away from their faith because, in their words, they want to do whatever they want. Sometimes it's not a young man or a young woman. Sometimes it's a seasoned person. They make a choice to walk away from their faith because, in their own words, they want to be free to do whatever they want. And I understand this. I understand this because I'm going to speak from my perspective. My perspective was that I was grafted into a system of religion, a very stringent system of religion that was very focused on rules and not on relationship with God. And so, as an act of rebellion against this religious group, I decided to break the rules in defiance, and exit the group. And I don't know if any of you have been in religious groups like this. Like, if you came to Christ as an adult, you never faced this as a teenager. But if you've been a Christian through your teenage years, you will have definitely heard this. You'll have definitely heard, don't date boys who are not Christian. Don't date girls who are not Christian. And so, my act of rebellion was to date a girl who was not Christian. Or my friends who are girls, their act of rebellion was to date boys or girls who were not Christian. Same thing with the boys who were whatever. And it's so silly. It's so silly that just dating the person that you want to date that is maybe outside of your group is such a strong statement of rebellion. It is so silly. But that's what we felt. That's what we felt. We were rebelling. We were rebelling against the system of rules. I just want to be free from these rules. It escalates. It escalates. I want to be free from these rules. So I grew up in a version of Christianity where having a sip of alcohol was a bad thing. Having the appearance of being around alcohol, so being in a bar, but not drinking alcohol was just as bad as being drunk. It was so dumb, these rules that we had. And so my act of rebellion was to have a beer. I don't like the taste of beer. So then it was to have a glass of wine, because I do like the taste of wine. And that was my act of rebellion. And to get drunk or to try drugs or any dumb thing like that. And the problem when we do this is that we create a false equivalence between these acts of rebellion and between Jesus. What Jesus has done is not equal to a beer. If you think about it, you're rejecting something that is so awesome for something that is so trivial. We create a false equivalence. Jesus is bigger than your romantic flings. And the really interesting thing is that Jesus does not withdraw his love even when we do that stuff. Even when we go through our acts of rebellion and we're rebelling against the rules and against the religion, Jesus' love jumps right over that because Jesus is about relationship. He was never about religion. Jesus does not flip out when we get tattoos. Have you ever been a part of a religious group that's against tattoos? You're smiling because you've been, because you know this. Dan, you know this. Death metal. No. Jesus doesn't freak out about the sound of the guitars or how crunchy they are. His love jumps right over that stuff. Jesus' love continues to pursue us even when we're drunk and bombed out of our mind or we're strung out on hallucinogenics and opiates. His love is bigger than that stuff. There's a false equivalence that we've set up, that this thing is equal to this thing. No, Jesus' love is just so much higher and above all of that. And that's the thing that breaks my heart when I see these young people walk away from their faith for something so small. I'm like, that man is not equal to Jesus. That boy, that relationship is not equal to Jesus. Sure, go, find out, date, get your heart broken, I don't know, whatever. Jesus is still bigger than that. He's still more awesome than that. See the world, see if it satisfies. I'm willing to bet it doesn't. But even though you make those choices, even though you mess up, Jesus' love remains and persists. You see, all these things are an illusion. They're chasing the wind. It will never satisfy. What does Jesus say there at the end of that passage, at the end of that section we just read? He says, what kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? Did you see that? What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for? If you want to rebuild your faith, if you want to build a strong faith, you have to realize that there is nothing you could trade your soul for. The only thing your soul is worth is a love that is so perfect that it would spare no expense to get you back. That's the only thing your soul is worth. Don't trade your soul for anything less. The only thing your soul is worth is a love that is so perfect that would have you back no matter how badly you screwed yourself up. Don't trade your soul for anything less. Trade your soul only for that awesome, perfect love. The only thing that is worth your soul is a love that is so perfect that it pursues you even when you reject it. And the reason that this is tough ground for us to cover is because we, each one of us, have an individualistic streak and a rebellious streak in us. We want to be in the driver's seat. Jesus is saying, no, step into the passenger seat and let me drive. We want to believe that we can just snap our fingers and bootstrap ourselves to a higher consciousness by self-helping ourselves. We want to gain the whole world and not care if we lose ourselves. We think we will be happy if we finally gain the whole world. This week, I listened to a fascinating podcast. It's a series. The name of the podcast is Death, Sex, and Money. It's the conversations about the things that we all think about, but we do not want to talk about. And in this one, they were talking to a gentleman and his son who are part of the so-called 1%. And even them, with their vast wealth and just a kind of life that would just blow your mind. Like they asked the guy, how many homes do you own? And he's like, well, I don't like to think about that. You know that he has a lot of homes when he can give an answer like that. Because most of us would go, one. If we have rental properties, we go one and so many rental properties. You know? But if you have so many homes that are just your homes, that are just there existing, that you paid for or you're paying for or whatever, it's like that kind of wealth, most of us just do not exist in it and whatever. And yet, even hearing him talk about his life, you get a sense that as much as he will never want for anything, and he has wealth that will outrun his son and his grandchildren, there's still something there that it didn't touch, that it didn't fix. And he talked about it himself. He said that there's a point where you reach and it's like all your needs are met, and so you end up spending money on things you want, or in toys or in trinkets, but after a while it's like, what's another Ferrari? He literally said that. I was like, man. I know, eh? We think we will be happy if we've gained the whole world, but actually it doesn't lead to true happiness. There's something bigger. Here's how I'd like to end. Rebuilding faith requires that you understand that following Christ is not easy. It's not popular. But in spite of all of those things, it is worth it every time. You see, Jesus' message, if you really want to live it out, even to this day, it is countercultural. And sometimes it will line up with the culture in which we live, and sometimes it won't. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes Christ will ask things of you. The Holy Spirit will touch areas of your life that will pull you in directions that the people around you will look at and think that you're out of your mind. But we lay aside all of those things for something greater. Rebuilding faith requires that you understand that sometimes you have to lay down the things that you think will make you happy and instead reach for things that will make you whole. Do not seek happiness, seek wholeness. Lay down the things that will make you happy and seek the things that will make you whole. That is why in that section we just read, Jesus says self-help is not the way. Self-sacrifice is the way. Self-help is about happiness. Self-sacrifice is about wholeness. Rebuilding faith requires understanding that sometimes you will face hardship and trial. But hardship and trial are not a test. They are a refining process. They're like going through the fire and having the stuff that is useless removed from you and taking out the gold that is inside of you. Rebuilding faith requires that you understand that your soul is worth so much more than the things we get tempted to trade it for. Rebuilding faith requires that you understand that there is nothing that you have done, there is nothing that you can do in your past or in your present or in fact in your future that can separate you from the love of God. That's what the Bible says. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Let's end by reading verse 27 to 28. It says, "Don't be in such a hurry to go into business for yourself. Before you know it, the Son of Man will arrive with all the splendor of his Father, accompanied by an army of angels. You'll get everything you have coming to you, a personal gift. This isn't a pie in the sky by and by. Some of you standing here are going to see it take place. See the Son of Man in kingdom glory." This isn't a pie in the sky by and by. I believe that if we trust God with our lives, and if we truly rebuild a faith that is based on relationship and not on the rules of religion, we'll find something truly awesome. Amen. That's all I have to share for now.